Ross, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. Really excited to chat all things track and field. For those who don't know who you are, what you do, please introduce yourself.
Rightio. Well, thanks for having me. So I'm a New Zealander, based out of Cambridge, the North Island of New Zealand. I work in high performance sports. I work across a multitude of sports as it happens. I'm in a sort of strength conditioning sort of sports science capacity. Um, my primary sport is track and field, but also have one rower, a beach volleyball player, a squash player, a kayaker, and I bit of an advisory role with some other speed climbing, actually, another one randomly I think had a bit of a role with. So yeah, reasonably diverse background in that space. But currently working with a couple of throwers, a jumper, a couple of sprinters, so in different capacities. Sometimes it's just the S&C space. Sometimes it's I'm coaching a sprinter as well. So yeah, and background before that, I've got an academic background, and my PhD was actually in sprint related stuff, and the tapering detraining piece. And formerly to that, I was a bobsleigh athlete for a number of years, and prior to that, I was a very bad track and field athlete. So yeah, that's about it, I think.
And I believe your wife was a track and field athlete as well. Is that right?
Yep, my wife was a heptathlete, 2012 Olympian for New Zealand, Sarah Ross now. Yeah, so she's a much more accomplished track and field athlete than I am. So she's got the bragging rights in the family in that space.
Yeah, well, I think you've got the coaching rights. We'll say we'll split it like that, for sure, because I know that you've humbly scanned over your athletes there, but there are plenty of variety and high level ones at that, and we're gonna talk about the ideas that you have both from a research and applied standpoint, and maybe dig into those a little bit more and how you're working with your athletes every day. So, what I found interesting just kind of researching yourself and some of the work that you've done is that you do have quite a wide variety of athletes, and you'd mentioned some sprinters, some jumpers there. Um, I'm wondering, what is the kind of process for assessing their profiles like and individualizing their training now? Assuming that the events are obviously different and they have the demands that they do, but obviously then there's the individual characteristic piece. I'm thinking of some athletes in particular that you coach that, are very, very interesting cases. So I'd love you to just kind of maybe give us an overview of what that looks like for you and maybe how you've got to some of the ideas that you have with those athletes.
Yeah, no, good question. I guess there's I'd like to say there was a very strict pure science and I had it all down to a fine art, but I'd be lying. Um, I do run a battery of tests on a regular basis for athletes. That and obviously you profile them on the basis of how they perform their event is the key thing. That's what any coach would do. If they're a runner or a jumper, are they stride length dominant? Are they stride rate dominant? How does it work? How do they, are they sort of muscular power end of the spectrum, or they're elastic sort of tendon sort of athlete? So I do the battery tests I run, and I've got I don't know how many people on my database on this now, but I do vertical jump, just on a vertical jump, a drop jump, a single leg drop jump, and we've got another sort of a cycle erg, if you like. It's called an optimal cadence erg, which is optimal cadence is the cadence at which you reach peak power. And there's a couple of papers from the 90s, I think Hautier et al. Maybe from 1996 that sort of showed this relationship of optimal cadence. It's like a 5-second sprint on inertial erg, I suppose. And there's this relationship between fiber type and optimal cadence. Now, it's not particularly tight, I wouldn't say. The R squared is high, it's like 0.89 from a biopsy data, but it was at the end of maybe 10, 12, 15 athletes, whatever. So it wasn't a big study, but nonetheless, from that battery you get purely concentric muscle power as the bike test. Okay, so I would argue the single leg and double leg drop jumps give you an elastic metric, which might give you, as well as a foot. And so in between those two, I have a double leg drop jump will give me something. Single leg drop jump might point out they can't do half of the RSI that they do on the single leg that they do double leg. I tend to think there's maybe a foot strength, calf strength issue there that they can't reach an underlying threshold to produce enough power and force. So maybe there's a foot strength element that needs to be addressed. So that's one sort of rule of thumb, if you like, that I have there. The vertical jump is probably a combination between muscular power and elastic power. But it does give you quite an interesting sort of assessment, and you combine that with the way they perform their event. I think you get some level of understanding of how that body wants to operate, and then so you'll then be looking to train accordingly. And then it comes to the question of do you train their gifts or you train their weaknesses? And I tend to go with the gifts. People like to be the man or the woman in a given modality. So when they come to training, they've got their swagger on because this is their element. And I think that's you need to have that. You need to have a little bit of that. If the weaknesses are sufficiently poor that they're a rate limiting performance metric, obviously they need to be brought up to speed. And I think to be an elite athlete, I just had a wee bit of time in South Africa end of last year with Laurent Muley, and he made a very good comment, I thought, to the fair. He's talking about Femke Bol, and he said, she should be characterized as an endurance-based 400-meter runner, but she's still really fast. So her weaknesses are still really good, and I think that's what people have to understand is if you want to be elite at that level, your weaknesses have to be better than most national level athletes' strengths are. So yeah, you train both, but I would still bias it towards the strengths if it was viable, I suppose. Yeah.
And I don't want to get too distracted maybe from the battery there because I think there's a lot to unpack, but the foot strength side of things, is that something that is just routine in your program anyway and everyone's doing it, or is it just a case of only when needed the intervention is kind of applied, if that makes sense?
Oh no, I've sort of gone down this rabbit hole a bit, and everybody's doing it to some extent, and I think you look at some of these athletes like Gout from Australia. Obviously, we see a bit of his performances online and what have you, and his heels don't touch the ground. Like even when he walks, his heels don't touch the ground. It's like what a specimen. Amazing athlete, bounce to die for. We watch with bated breath to see what the rest of his career turns out like. So, and just watching that, it made me think, because he's not super tall, but he's got this massive stride length, and from what I understand is, and he's not heavily muscled or anything like that. He just has this elastic system, which is, insane. And so with that in mind, we're kind of like, well, there's no point having, squatting 300 kgs and this, that, and the other thing if you can't put it through your feet, foot, calf, ankle, triceps, suro, whatever, through that whole complex. So I've sort of been playing around with, traditional strengthening stuff, reactive bouncing, resisted bouncing, assisted bouncing, because I feel like, and I certainly don't have any answers here, but I've been doing double leg bouncing, assisted bouncing, double leg resisted bouncing, single leg assisted and resisted, and I've been doing it on a contact mat to give them feedback, because we're trying to train the nervous system as well as the rest of the muscular or musculoskeletal stuff. So, have I got the answers? Not by any stretch, but I do think there is a lot to be gained in that space, and it's kind of a no-brainer that, and particularly if, as I said, if your RSI is if your single leg is less than 50% of your double leg, this is that's only my rule of thumb, and I do it as a drop jump from a 40 centimeter box for the double leg, 20 centimeters for the single leg. So, but the RSI, and when I say RSI, I don't mean the height over the contact time. I mean the flight time over contact time is 50%. Yeah, that's one of my metrics. And if they're poor at that, they will have, if I'm programming them, they'll have a fair bit of work in that space.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you beat me to it there. I was going to ask you what the drop platforms are as well, but yeah, that's great to know. I suppose with regards to, you've split roles where some you're coaching, completely. You have a program built in
Mhm.
from the track to the gym, and then some more on an
Yep.
S&C capacity. Let's jump in on where you're coaching the athlete in a more complete sense. And obviously, they're case by case basis is here. You mentioned you're coaching Tiaan Whelpton. He's someone who seems like he's quite strength driven. Would that be fair to say? Like, how do you
Oh
kind
yeah,
of?
he's got enormous power. Like I haven't actually seen anybody, and I've been working in this space for a long time. I've never seen somebody with that sort of level of power without having really pushed the boat out in that space. He would think he has, but he could get a lot stronger, a lot more power. He's guys hand cleaning 165 kilos. And he's a meter 94 tall, so he's a tall, skinny kid with this insane muscular power. So he presents quite different, uh, gifts and curses, aren't they? Like everything is a gift and a curse depending on how you look at it. And um, so he wants to use this crazy horsepower that he's got.
Hmm.
And I think at high speed, it's probably possibly problematic that if you want to be on the ground, ripping it up when you should be bouncing over the top of it. Maybe you don't express the full potential of your thing, and so that's one of the things we're sort of playing with now is and his single leg bouncing in the drop jump as a metric isn't as good as perhaps we would like it to be. Um, and despite being relatively slim, he is still 90 kilos because he's meter 94 tall.
Hmm.
And so there's a fair bit of body mass to bounce with. So yeah, he's a very interesting human in terms of that power stuff, like insane power.
Hmm.
So yeah, power on the bike, concentric muscle power on the bike is pumps out 2,500 watts, no problem. In running shoes, not even in cycling shoes. And so some of those things are kind of abnormal in a good way, like. But then perhaps his elastic stuff isn't on that far range of world class that sort of Laurent Muley would have alluded to. That's still a work on to get that stuff, um, and even when you work the bouncing stuff, he's got better at his RSI stuff. He definitely has, but he's doing it by just jumping higher rather than going faster off the ground. And it's kind of like, well, that's not really what I intended. So that's why I sort of moved to trying the assisted stuff. Can we get you quick off the, doing with a band assisted, trying to solve the problems in a different way. So, and I don't quite. Actually had, we mentioned Stu McMillan before we got online on there. Had a quite a good discussion with Stu about this particular athlete, and where do you go? Do you just make him? Do you just let him eat the track up with? He takes 41.6 steps or something like that to run the 100 when he's run his PB, I think. And do we keep pushing that button? Do we go, let's see if we can get into 40 and a half steps. Can he challenge, get bigger stride length than Bolt, like maybe he can. There's nothing written in stone anywhere, is there? So, or do we need to just get it up to 42 and a half with 0.2 faster hertz? So we're sort of playing with some approaches there, and yeah, we're learning. And certainly, he's only just moved. So I've been coaching him sort of effectively by correspondence for the last sort of couple of years, and he's moved just in the last fortnight to Cambridge. So I'm quite excited to be able to learn a lot faster and then adjust things accordingly. So yeah, we'll see where that gets to.
Yeah, that's very exciting. I think just personally, and I think this is just on my mind at the moment as a coach, is like the navigating change or maybe conversing with change of like which direction do you go is like always a difficult thing. It's never as straightforward as you'd like because, I think many
Mm,
of us can point out what we'd like to happen, but it's never a straightforward conversation of how
no,
we'll get there or maybe some of the trade-offs that you're going to experience in the
yeah,
pursuit
yeah.
is not straightforward.
No, I always laughed because I had this discussion with Stu McMillan about it, and he had the example of Dwayne Chambers, which I think he's spoken about in a podcast or two before. That he was this muscular powerhouse that had run 997, and then he tried to make him this more efficient sort of turnover guy, and he ran 997 again. Like you got to the same point through different mechanisms or whatever. I think that was the times I might be out by a hundredth or two, but something to that effect. And it's like you got back to the same place. You didn't go any further or any. So it's yeah. I mean, my tendency at the moment is with Tiaan is like, well, do we just make you the most powerful, human watts per kilo on the planet and just run with it and see what happens? And I had a bobsleigh background. He'd be an amazing bobsledder too. I just look at him and think, oh, you could own that sport as a break. You could be the best brakeman in the world. I reckon. And obviously I'm biased, so I'll take that with a grain of salt. But get him up to 100 kilos, he'd be power cleaning at 180k and running 10-2. It'd be a pretty scary human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The next thing I was gonna ask you about that is, you know, he's someone obviously that expresses a lot of force. It seems like it does play a role in his running strategy as well. Um, do you kind of, I suppose, try to tinker with that as well as you chase that more elastic side? Do you try to blend those things together? If I'm making sense by saying that, because he's quite horizontal biased nearly with how he's
Oh
doing
yeah,
it.
he's got this. He's very lateral flexion. Yeah, crazy. Very mobile naturally in his back. And I don't know how much you buy into the spinal engine piece or
Mm,
not. Yeah, I think he's a spinal monster. Like that's his thing. And so I have we train that actively now rather than trying to take that away and make him this linear robotic guy. Like that's not his jam. That said, we've been lucky enough in the last couple of weeks to run a couple of reps through an optojump system rather, and or with a radar behind him. And certainly because he wants to just smash the ground, like he grinds the ground. He gets to the point at sort of early in his sort of 6 to 15 meters. We've just been talking about this actually in the last 24 hours, where his speed plateaus as he comes out. He drives too long with his grindy stuff. And rather than pushing behind the center of mass, he gets his foot out in front and wants to rip the track up and loses a bit of speed against the top guys in that first. He had a race last year. He ran against Lockie Kennedy in the 60, and
mm,
to me, if they got out together, but then Lockie put a meter on him between sort of 5 meters and 20 meters, and then they stayed, 643 to 650 in that race, and it was. He wasn't getting pulled away from after that point. It wasn't, but it was that initial 20. And so there's some things to sort out there. And I think, there is a tendency to want to use your gift, but sometimes it's not appropriate to use it in the way you
mm,
want to use it. And so we certainly haven't got that efficiency piece dialed yet. And that's going to be the project for the next couple of years in the lead up to LA and trying to figure that out.
mm. So you would attribute that to kind of, I suppose, energy distribution nearly, would you say? A little
Oh,
bit?
and just is part of it. Like I think, and that's one of the things we've been talking about is if you absolutely bury yourself in that first just try and as much force as possible, and there's possibly a sort of intensity accuracy trade off in terms of where you're putting the angle of attack into the ground and what have you, and then perhaps there's less there for the last sort of 20 meters. And historically, he's been a guy that gets out well, and then despite being 6'4" and a bit, he's not running away from people at the end. He's possibly getting caught. And is that an energy cost of starting like that? Well, quite possibly. Is it also a piece of the foot calf stuff that he when you get those high vertical forces at max V, he's mushing out too much. He can't do what Gout does and just ping off the track, because he's so possibly that too. So there's any number of queries you might have in terms of
Mm,
what's causing what. But yeah, I mean, we're in the lucky position now that he's here, and yeah, I'm pretty excited to rip into it over the next couple of years and see what we can do.
mm. Yeah, I think that's another key part to it as well. It's like how much time do you have to invest in that kind of change process? Because sometimes if for athletes who are late in their career, you wonder, is it actually, we got what 2 years here, you're still at this high level. Are we
Yeah,
are we
yeah, yeah,
supposed to be playing with this right now? You know what I mean?
yeah.
even though
No,
it's
exactly. And I think
better.
if, had he been 18 and moving up here with those things, we might have had a different approach. Um, so yeah, no, it's that's a valid point you raise there. Absolutely. Yeah.
With some of the other athletes that you have, do any kind of, I suppose, maybe not as far veer on other sides of the spectrum, and I'm just interested to know, like maybe how you've molded some of your approaches to them and their needs.
Yeah, look, there's another athlete I have that I'm sort of helping out in the S&C space who's um, a much more elastic animal. And their testing metrics couldn't be more different. Um, this other guy he's an 8 meter plus long jumper on a good day, and but his concentric power on the bike would be 50% of Tiaan's. It's like, wow, that's so cool. Like, and that said, he's strong. He's a strong athlete, but he doesn't have that sort of explosive muscular power. But he bounces beautifully. And so yeah. So what do you do? I don't control the wider training. So what am I doing with him in the gym that's different? He does less volume because he doesn't enjoy it the same way perhaps that Tiaan does, and his coach wouldn't have him doing the same way. And I guess there is an inherent, if you can do crazy stuff in a training element, you like doing that training element because everybody's going, wow, look at that guy, sort of thing. So yeah. But in the same, there's still a lot of similarities, to be fair, because we all need, as we talked to before, you still need to have your weaknesses to be pretty good. So I'm trying to bring up his contractile power while maintaining that elastic qualities, I suppose. Um, and yeah, but he does do more, you know, the bouncing piece, and that's actually an interesting aside. We talk about going down rabbit holes, but the foot calf stuff, I think I've sort of gone down this idea that you need to train the bouncing both with a straight-legged pogo type bounce, but you also need to do some bent-legged bouncing because I think the soleus and strength. You're going to do straight-legged calf raises. You might do seated calf raises. You might do sort of those low squat foot jump sort of bounces. As well as the pogos. So yeah, he's and some of these things are almost like it's almost like personality profiling. You get people to do some of these exercises and they have a sort of a signature in the way they do it, a physical signature, and it's like, wow. And I generally won't change it because I think that's how you do it, unless it's completely not what I wanted. Yeah, it's quite interesting. You have a couple of athletes, some just want to smash, these muscular athletes want to smash the ground, and this long jump, he just bounces beautifully. Like it's a thing of beauty to watch. That you can do 40 bounces in a row with in a sort of a squat position, and he's contact time's great, his flight time's great, and it doesn't seem to be that hard. He's not puffing at the end of it. It's just he's got kangaroo tendons or something like it's cool. Yeah, cool to watch.
You'd wonder if it's something that they've been told and therefore start to own, or is it like just that inherent quality that they can sense comes quite easy to them and they just therefore
Yeah,
create their own meaning or any, you just wonder because I think you're dead right
yeah.
that people do kind of recognize what they're good at and sometimes so early so that you're like, did someone tell you that you're really good at that, or do you just own it naturally? You'd wonder.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess if other people are doing the same thing, there's obviously you can't help but compare and contrast and see see that sort of aspect. But yeah, I don't know whether that was something that was ever actively pointed out to him. But I've probably pointed out to him because I'm just like, wow, look at that, that's cool. Like I just enjoy that sort of physicality where people can do something exceptionally well. But yeah, there's certainly I actually had tested 4 school kids yesterday that would come in that actually, this long jump kid is helping coach, and he brought these 4 school kids, 4 very talented young men came in, all between about, they're between 15 to 17 years old, I guess they are, all running between 10.6 and 11.1. So all pretty good young talents. And we did that battery test I mentioned before, and there was, one guy had massive vertical jump, RSI was only okay. Another guy had, massive RSI vertical jump. It just was cool, and it's kind of like, in that context, they could sort of see in the sort of against their peers, like, oh, geez, I'm really good at that, or I'm not so good at that, and well, the single legs, I'm good at the double leg, it's not so good at the single legs. So it was very, it was a very worthwhile testing session for these kids. I hope, at least, for me, it was. Whether they got the same out of it as I did, I don't know, but nonetheless, certainly you could see those elements in the compare and contrast, and they would be able to see, hey, I'm good at this, I'm not so good at that. Yeah.
I think nowadays as well with social media, like athletes are able to kind of find those archetypes, if you will, and say that's more of me. Like
Yeah.
I'm a Dwayne Chambers, I'm more of a, because I'm
Yeah.
muscular and naturally, or for someone who's a bit more wiry, like I'm an Andre DeGrasse or a gout or something like that. I don't know if anyone's a gout
Yeah.
to be honest with you, but like just kind
No,
of more that type.
yeah. Yeah. No, he's one off, I think, that kid. It's going to be very interesting to see how that progresses.
Yeah,
I certainly
very
hope.
interesting.
I hope he progresses in the same way and keeps injury free and all those things that are roadblocks, I suppose, for people expressing their potential. But yeah, best of luck for him. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I think many are anxiously but also very interested in watching his development because it seems like the sky is the limit for him, no doubt.
Mm.
The the part where you're kind of, I suppose, communicating slash negotiating with the other coaches about like what you're doing in the strength and conditioning, where like are you kind of, I suppose, doing strength training after the sessions, or are you trying to also maybe do some things as primers as well? Like, what does that kind of look like as a working relationship with planning, strength and conditioning, as
Yeah,
not being the lead coach?
that's a good question. Usually, I'm just putting them in where I'm told to, and that's because that, and rightly so. They are the lead in that space, and they'll have a global program, and I want a session here, session there. But that's not to say we don't. I might not suggest things, or hey, why don't we try this, or and I guess it depends a little on your relationship within the team. So in our sort of setup, we have a variety of levels of professionalism in sort of working teams, and we have levels of carding and support and what have you. And I'm sure it's the same in Ireland, or a lot of places probably. And so, yeah, your authority or insights might be viewed differently in a different team, and that's fine. I'm all good with that, because the bottom line is the technical coach is generally the lead of that thing, and rightly so. And so I'm happy to acquiesce to that. That said, I'm reasonably forthright in terms of my thing, and I will challenge if I think hey, this is what we should be doing. So yeah, I mean, it's finding, and I guess it also depends on how strong your relationship is with that person. Like, some people I've been working with for years, some it's a new relationship, some I've known, since day dot sort of thing. So yeah, all of those things come into play, and how that relationship might work, and yeah, it's always a bit complex, isn't it? So it's not how you make it work the best.
So for that reason, is there kind of a degree of flexibility in terms of like gym sessions happening on standalone days, or do they typically happen after training? Do you have, I suppose, a philosophy on, neural with neural, or, it can actually be quite a general stimulus, so therefore, I have it on a standalone day? Because there seems to be different schools of thought on that, no matter where you are in the world.
Yeah, and I think the whole probably Charlie Francis had that stuff that was a catalyst to a lot of that stuff back in the day from the 80s, that you do your speed and strength on the same day, and you probably do your speed first because that's your priority training unit, then you do some strength, and then you have a tempo day or whatever, and then 48 72 hours, a wash and repeat sort of thing. And I guess that's good. I like that approach. But that said, some people, some, like Tiaan is a super explosive guy. You can't. If I gave him a big speed session and a big gym session on a day, that would absolutely cook him. That's not going to be viable. So We've played with all sorts of different things with him in terms of no strength training because he's so strong. Do we need to do strength training? We did, with speedball, the sort of the Alan Wells Scottish speedball sort of gig, responded pretty well to that too. And so, there's sort of interesting. I'd like to say I had a firm philosophy, but I don't. I will change it depending on what I see, and and again, most of the time I don't get to dictate that anyway if I'm not coaching them. So, I do. I probably tend towards that sort of Charlie Francis-esque sort of philosophy, but it's certainly not written in stone. And I tried it with Tiaan. He quite liked doing gym as a standalone day, and we might do he might do a 3-day rotation of speed, gym, tempo type stuff, and then speed endurance, gym, tempo, whatever it might be. There was horses for courses, and I probably haven't done enough pure coaching with elite track and field athletes to say that I have a philosophy which is concrete, and I arguably would say I think it's generally a mistake to have a concrete philosophy when people have different stuff. I worked in skeleton and had a couple of athletes that go to the Olympics in skeleton as push. I was a push coach, push speed power coach, and again they were different athletes, different stuff too. So I've fluctuated around with different things, and I like trying stuff. I like innovating with stuff. I like
Yeah, I've heard some good rules of thumb on these sorts of things. Like one guest I had before, a former coach of mine had said, like, I'm definitely going to modify weight training on a Monday if my technical session falls on a Tuesday and so forth. And I think that's like, a very,
absolutely.
very good rule of thumb.
The
But
priority has to be the technical, doesn't it? I think
exactly, yeah. And that's I definitely think that's a good heuristic to operate off. But I've similar to yourself, I kind of have, I wouldn't say a Tiaan Whelpton athlete per se, but certainly someone who expresses strength as their gift. And I found that, like, if I tagged on a heavy strength session after, let's say, a heavy speed session, the quality would go down quite a bit. And in a phase where, let's say, max strength at cycle 2 or 3 is actually somewhat of a priority, and technical training is not the next day, I found that throwing it in on a standalone day actually was fine because intensive tempo was the next day. So it's not also very, neural in a way. But it also did give intent, a boost on that day. So, that's where I've
and they
kind of
can
learned.
express themselves.
Yeah,
They express
exactly.
themselves, and that's like, and that, it's cool to watch when they it's a confidence booster. And I think all those things, there's no one element that's mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, whatever. All these things combine and to be this holistic sort of athlete. So I mean, that's why I don't think you can smash everybody into the one box. I would probably start with that model of speed and power, speed and strength on the same day, but then make their accordingly depending on how they present it. And then obviously you have competitive schedules and what's coming up and all the rest of it, what their life commitments are like. It just, some athletes have only got a couple of hours a day to train. They can't do that. Cool, we'll do a different thing again. And then, as with, everybody knows, stress is stress, isn't it? If you've got university exams and you've got this, that, and the other, one session a day might be heaps. You can't do 2 training units. Okay. You spread the week up differently. So, you got to accommodate all that stuff. So,
One part of your research is on the likes of eccentric training. Am I correct in saying that you've kind of done work on the likes of attenuated eccentric loading and things like that?
So I've done quite a lot of stuff in that eccentric space in terms of just playing with it, and I think it's a really powerful tool, and I think it's kind of one of those things that it is, because it is a powerful tool. It's easy to abuse as well, and with that in mind, I think a lot of people will try it and they'll get bad results because you get DOMs, you get muscle damage, and then it's one of those things that the results are not forthcoming quickly. So the cause and effect is not always immediately obvious, and so therefore it was useless. Sort of thing. As you say, there is a latency sort of period to some of these things, and there was a reasonably well cited study. I think Leong et al. Jim Martin's lab in Utah, and they had this thing, and Jim told me the story that they had he'd done a study to eccentric cycling on this very high intensity maximal eccentric loading at high speed, so really good stimulus. And he was I think maybe in his 50s at the time, and he was a former sprint, so he's a good athlete, former sprint cyclist back in the day, and his power had been just diminishing every year by year, as you get older. And he was, this is pathetic. And he doing 1,200 and something watts, and he was, pretty gutted about it. And he did this, I think it was a 6-week block, maybe 6 or 8 week training block of eccentric cycling, and I thought, and he buried himself. Like, he's this highly motivated, awesome dude, and got to the end of it, and he'd gone from 1240 to 1255 watts or something like that. Had miserable adaptation. And the thing that always intrigued me, he said so he was just gutted, like, that's, geez, all that work, all that DOMs, I've done all this stuff, and it hasn't changed at all. Anyway, long story short, 6 weeks later, he had some people visiting his lab, and he was sort of showing them this different this optimal cadence ergo that he had, and he jumps on 6 weeks later. I think 6, might have been 8, I'm not sure what it was, but 6 to 8 weeks later, jumps on the bike and pumps out 1,450 watts. So he's gone up 200 and something watts on his pre-test, and he hasn't done anything for the last 6 weeks. He's just he's reaped the rewards of this eccentric training. So and then they ended up bringing in the cohort of athletes that they did in the study, and they brought them all in, and it turned out everybody had done the same thing. They all got this sort of this long latency increase in power despite doing no training for that period of time. And so I suppose, with that in mind, eccentric training it's a powerful tool. In the wrong hands, it's going to mess you up. It's not something you're going to. So there is a degree of finesse in terms of how you might use it and how you might use it appropriately. And then could they have done it better by doing a modicum of eccentric training? There's something that Preslin paper sort of shows you can maintain sarcomeres in series with this tiny dose of eccentric loading. Like, I think it was 2x4 Nordics per week. They maintain sarcomeres in series from this this post-training status with that sort of load. So we're trying to, the adaptations you're getting with eccentric training might be fiber type related. They might be fascicle lengths, / sarcomeres in series, which has an additive effect on contractile speed. There's all these sort of things that interplay. And so, in an ideal world, you do enough to get the sort of the overshoot in terms of fiber type and all the adaptations from high speed eccentric training, but also maintain the sarcomeres in series, but also freshen up the nervous system and get rid of the muscle damage. And that might be your optimal performance as a result of that. But it's easier said than done.
Yeah. It definitely seems like no, full permission to do that. I've had a lot of conversations around this topic just because I'm curious. I maybe have jumped on with the likes of other coaches from Oceania and have been big proponents to saying that it can obviously raise force production capabilities. And I suppose when you're early in the year and maybe you are not prioritizing an indoor season, that can be actually damage worthwhile for the dividends of the later 100%. Part of the season.
100%. Yeah.
Whereas
and the thing with eccentric training, sorry to interrupt.
No, of course.
The thing with eccentric training is the detraining from eccentric work is quite long. You don't detrain quickly as strictly as you do with concentric training. A couple of studies would suggest that. So as you say, the dividends for later on in the season are significant. I would just, as a caveat to it, as I've alluded to already, I would add that you probably should do, once a week, once a fortnight, you should touch it, even in season if you're trying to maintain some of those optimal qualities.
You actually beat me to my next question, which was based on, I suppose, your implementation and obviously your research as well. Like, what kind of rules of thumb do you have to implement it with some finesse? You said the kind of top up, if you will, there. Is
Yeah.
there, we're talking about somewhat like kind of high intensity, slow eccentric, super maximal stuff here. Mainly, or are we talking about also
No, not
fast
necessarily.
eccentric?
Your fast supermax or eccentrics is probably where you want to get to, and like that's difficult to do in a non-motorized, purpose-built environment. More difficult to do. Not impossible, but more difficult to do. The you might get the sort of morphological adaptations, the sarcomeres and series piece from the slow eccentric, long full range stuff. Great, but the fiber type piece, in terms of shifting towards that sort of 2x into the sort of myosin heavy chain spectrum, the fast eccentrics are the ones that you're probably wanting to be doing in that space. And so you can do that on a Cybex machine. You could do it on a King Kong, whatever. You could do eccentric bike as a modality that's been popularized. I think Jim Martin's crew have shown the benefits of that. But again, you need a purpose-built setup for that, and not easy to come by. Risky in some respects as well. We've had broken talus with somebody doing that, trying to stop the bike when the bike can't be stopped, and there are issues with these things as well. So, but risk reward, there's issues with any sort of training, isn't it? If you're pushing the boat out and you're trying to, yeah. But so yeah, going back to these, how you finesse it. I tend to, for a developmental athlete, well, first of all, for a young development athlete, I wouldn't use eccentric training anyway. You save that for later on in my mind, that you don't need to use the really tough tools that you're eking out the last few percent with. But let's say we've got a 20-year-old with a few years of gym training history. You might start using this eccentric modalities. You might, if they were still hadn't done a hell of a lot, you might do a block-based thing where you do an eccentric block. Again, the caveat to that is, in my mind at least, and this is not written in stone anywhere as well, that eccentric training will mess with your muscle. It'll probably mess with your proprioception because you're tearing up, presumably Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindles are all getting a bit of a hammering as well. So your proprioception might not be as good. So if you're trying to train technical elements in conjunction with having massive DOMs and muscle damage, probably not your smartest move. You should be keeping that in the back of your mind at least. And with that said, I wouldn't do 6 weeks in a row of high intensity eccentric training ever. Not for anybody. I just think it's too hard, and you'll train somebody to depression, physically and emotionally, by doing that. Even if I had a block of eccentric training like that, I would do 2 weeks on, 1 week off, because I just think it's just too stressful. If you, I mean, it depends what you call eccentric training. I'm calling overloaded, super maximal, high intensity, high intent stuff. Yeah, you can't do it forever without a break because it'll wipe you out.
Yeah, it's definitely even tough, I think, the eccentric tempo stuff, but I suppose that's kind of why there are rules of thumb out there where, people are doing it generally in general prep slash early specific prep. And I think the factors such as, how much preparation time has an athlete got before they need to be ready can make you, exhaust those windows a little bit more. I had a coach recently who came back to me and on this topic, I don't know how he got onto it, but he was like, in a collegiate, setting, I just don't think that's really that possible because you've got like 4 mesocycles prior to indoors.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that needs to get done in that mesocycle, and it pretty much needs to be somewhat technical from the get-go. So is what that, eccentric stimulus is going to give me going to delay too much of the prep for too long? It's just a kind of something he hasn't
Yeah.
experimented with per se, but it's what his mind is going to, if you know what I mean, initially.
So, my counter to that would be, so with experienced athletes, I would do a different. I wouldn't do a block periodization. I'd do almost a bastardized Louis Simmons sort of conjugate type system where I'd have a week of. So I might, and my typical thing used to be. I've changed this a little bit since then, but it used to be like slow eccentric week, a fast eccentric week, a ballistic week, then a recovery week, then rinse and repeat, and go through that again. And you might, if you had four, that might be 4 mesocycles of that. That sort of that 4 times 4 weeks in your preparatory block, perhaps, or 3 times 4. Then you're touching it on a regular basis. You're never slaughtering them so much that they can't do something technical, and so perhaps the best of both worlds. Again, it needs to be feathered depending on how intense they go at it and how much DOMs they get and how much damage. But that seemed to be a more appropriate stimulus in my mind, at least, for people that were trying to do some technical stuff and trying to maintain a decent amount of motor learning and skill development throughout.
That's actually, if you don't mind, going to bring me on to a question I think is very interesting there. For someone from as a strength and conditioning standpoint, do you find sometimes that we're a bit inflexible, if I can use that word, with regards to how we change within a micro or meso microcycle? A lot of times I think our default is to maybe think about writing the same program, weights wise, track wise, or whatever, within a meso. So, like, for example, the idea of doing eccentric, slow, fast, and then for recovery week, let's say, ballistic could be not an automatic thought for many people, but you're giving a good example of actually, well, you can get everything you want really if you just become a little bit more flexible with how you do it.
Yeah, I think there is I'm really lucky. I don't deal with massive groups of people. I deal with, I've got quite a few athletes, but they're all individuals and they're all doing their own thing. And so, I can imagine that collegiate sense, if you had 25 athletes that, all 25 sprinter jumpers. Well, I don't know what that numbers they would have, but let's say you did. Very difficult to sort of to do that and accommodate that. That said, you could do that protocol that I just described. If there was a level of competency that they could all do these different things, because the problem with that is you don't get to rehearse. If you're doing an overloaded exercise 1 week, you might not do it the next week, you might not do it again for 3 weeks. And then so how do you develop the skill and all that sort of stuff? And I get all that. So difficult, but there are things you can do in that space. I still would challenge people that you couldn't do it if you had enough innovation. And there are people that are very inflexible. This is what I do. This is how I do it. There's in any industry you're going to have that. I'm not sure it's necessarily specific to S&C per se. Like there are a lot of really super smart, innovative people that do cool stuff. But there are a lot of people that don't as well. So it's like in any industry, you have a big spectrum of people. So yeah, I'm probably a bit ADHD or something, get bored and change stuff a bit, and but I don't know.
You keep it interesting.
Yeah.
Have you, this is actually a question I probably should have asked you earlier, but and it's very, pertinent to probably Tiaan more than anything, and it's kind of already been touched on. But I suppose, you mentioned he cleans 165, and that's obviously massive. Squats extremely heavy. Have you kind of had that conversation with him at this stage? Because I think that this max strength, I've experienced this as an athlete too, is like you get to that rate where you're not improving as much as you were before. Do you then just start going for bar speed and just move 165 faster because the gap is no longer overall force production? I mean, how have you been kind of managing that conversation? I know we kind of touched on that already a little bit, but
no, that's a really good. There's a really good question. How much strength is enough, and what have you? And I think my stock answer to that is more strength is always better if you can achieve it without excessive hypertrophy, excessive neural load, and excessive and that's not possible. So at some point you get this diminishing returns, as you've alluded to, and for Tiaan to get, he's done that with, he's just powerful. He's done that without, I don't think, that much work. He's quite extraordinary in how he's done that. I look at him compared to a lot of, I've never seen anybody else do that like that. So yeah, the stock answer is if it keeps increasing in strength and you're not doing 5 gym sessions a week or something stupid like that to keep like a weightlifter, then happy days. I'm okay with that. as you've alluded to, but if you get too muscular, then you don't bounce as well. All those other if everything else, all other things being equal, you don't compromise the except for hypertrophy, loss of elasticity, a lot of more strength. Why wouldn't you have it?
Mm.
I guess the probably possible counter to that is it lets you get away with things that perhaps are less suboptimal, and you get away with them and still be like in New Zealand, we don't have a million guys that can run 10-1 or 10 flat or 9-9. So for Tiaan, he can do like in this we talked about earlier that he can do some suboptimal mechanical things in a start perhaps and still beat everybody over 20 meters because he's stupidly powerful. If he didn't have that strength base, he wouldn't beat them. He just has this. He's just got he's a V12 and they're a V6. Like it's and so it possibly retards learning because you don't see that cause and effect because I smacked them up easy. It wasn't what are you talking about? My mechanics are great. Maybe they aren't great. It's just that the bar that you're competing against is not the bar you should. Maybe you should be the fastest starter in the world, and you're not. Why aren't you? Well, maybe your mechanics aren't good, despite having all this other stuff. So we've sort of had these discussions about that sort of stuff, and so yeah, it shouldn't be a problem as long as you have the cost of getting it. It's not too much in terms of having more strength. But the possible contra is that sort of motor learning piece, and you get stuck. And as you know, when you start, you do strength training, you get better at your event, and you think, oh, this is a golden goose. And then after 2 or 3 years, you add another 20 kilos to your squat, and your 100 time doesn't change. It's like, oh, and then the cost of getting another 20 kilos is higher again. And athletes, and I probably fell into this boat a little bit myself when I was a kid. You get married to the gym because it's so tangible, it's measurable, there's an emotional kick out of it, and there's a danger in that, isn't there?
Yeah, I definitely wasted. I don't want to say wasted, probably the wrong word, but I definitely went down that rabbit hole myself as an athlete, and kind of as you said there, to my surprise, the investment came at a cost. I did put on mass. I did lose
Yeah,
bounce. All because I tried to not add additional work, but let's say I tried to add intensity in places
yeah,
that I previously hadn't, and it did definitely take away from the more important sessions. So I think what you said in the beginning there is so important to take away, which is if it doesn't come at an extra cost, happy days. If it but it often at a certain
mm,
point can.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Did did you find that with him, like, maybe, that at 165, did that write him off for a couple of days, and therefore that your threshold oftentimes is to stay in that 95% range, or sorry, 90% range, and things like that, or
Yeah, we haven't touched that sort of level this season.
mm,
That was before last year's season, and to be fair, he ran pretty well out of that. He's a little bit lighter now, a little bit bouncier, I would say. So we're just trying to we're waiting for, as I talked to you beforehand, the conditions haven't been amazing in New Zealand. We've had sort of howling tailwinds and howling headwinds so far. And the not particularly warm summer to date. So hopefully that'll all change in the next couple of weeks, and we'll see what develops. But yeah, I mean, every season's an experiment, isn't it? You try something, and it's a slightly different version of that athlete Tiaan this year. Let's see what comes out of it. So yeah, fingers crossed we get some conditions that can let him express himself the way we want to see him express himself.
yeah, you're definitely touching on the chaos down there in New Zealand. Yeah, hopefully this weekend's a lot better. Um,
Mm.
you've mentioned kind of, I mean, certain pairings that they've gone well for athletes and things like that, but I'm wondering, like, and this is going to be hard to capture because I think it comes with the same level of nuance, but in the strength and conditioning world, or even just track and field in general, like, have you found anything that's uncomplimentary? Because I see things online, like many others, that you know we're talked. There's a lot about what works together very well, but um, I don't know if the same, for good reason, is spoken about. Maybe what doesn't work well. One that I heard recently, which was interesting, was pairing slow eccentric with fast eccentric. But you may have realized with your variety of athletes that actually that might be a good pair for some people to, I suppose,
Yeah, like
spark
I
them
think
neurally.
yeah, it depends what you call slow eccentric. If you're calling it the tempo-based stuff you sort of alluded to before, the 5 seconds, 10 seconds down, whatever, I don't call that eccentric training personally. I think that's because it's generally a load you can move concentrically,
Mm.
but it's just doing it at a slow tempo. I don't do that at all. So that's if that's what you're meaning, slow eccentric stuff. Yeah, maybe I don't have much experience with. I do isometric stuff, and I think it has a similar sort of benefits, perhaps in terms of the. I'm getting sidetracked here, I realise, but I'll come back to the question. The slow eccentric stuff, they're really slow. There's time on task. There's body awareness. There's learning a position. There's trunk control. Those are some really good things, and I don't want to negate that and be sort of facetious that that's a stupid idea. There are some really cool things about it. I see eccentric stuff as an overload stimulus, and I would typically do it in excess of 1 RM as a loading system. Maybe not initially the first week or two, but post that. So in terms of that sort of tempo stuff with the fast eccentric stuff, the tempo stuff, if it's an intense slow eccentric, you will get the sarcomeres and series piece. You might not get the fiber type piece. Are those two things sort of contradictory? I don't know. I suspect there might be some issues there with the slow stuff being driving fatigue, whereas the fast stuff you can do quickly without fatigue. And fatigue is generally looked on as a anti-fiber type driver, but I don't know the answer to that. What I would say, as I've alluded to already, was the intense eccentric loading and trying to do motor skill stuff is probably not a good combination. And in general terms, I don't think high volumes of strength training in any type are complementary necessarily for running fast or move high speed movement stuff. And so there has to be some sort of scope to periodize to that end. That, okay, we do need to get you stronger, but and then you can maintain strength reasonably well by so that'd be one of the tricks that I would do in season. You might touch the eccentric stuff once every 2 weeks, once every 10 days or whatever, as I sort of alluded to before. But you might also do some more traditional lifting in a warm up. We would do often, even if we're doing, let's say for a shot putter, they're doing bench press throws, they're throwing the bar, throwing 40 kilos, whatever it is. We might warm up for that by doing 5-3-1 in bench press, for example, and they might do 5 at 50%, 3 at 80%, 1 at 90+%. And so then they're just keeping that neural drive. They know how to move that stuff quickly. And we can measure those metrics with the gym wear and go, okay, well, they're still moving 90% really fast at the speed that predicts their 1 RM is being maintained. So then you get those sort of things. But back to your question of the non-complementary pairings, the motor learning piece of the eccentric stuff, the heavy strength or high volume strength and the speed. Those are probably the first ones that come to mind. I have to give that a bit of thought, actually. There probably are others, but I don't have too many other rules of thumb that spring straight to mind.
I'm assuming like any muscular endurance type stuff would not come before, anything that requires high neural output or things like that.
No, and I don't tend
Hypertrophy.
to do much of it. The only muscular endurance stuff I do is probably the isometrics. They might hold postures for a long time, and I think I'm not sure I don't necessarily do that as a I don't think of that as a fiber. It's a motor learning piece. It's just, I think that's really cool for learning positions and learning how to turn motor units on. Activating it. If you're doing a lunge position and you're pulling with your hamstring and you feel these things, it's like there's something in that, and potentially there's a sarcomeres and series piece, which again we sort of alluded to that there can be there's enough data that it's a worthwhile punt, I reckon. Some people might disagree, but that you can add contractile speed with that more sarcomeres and series. And on that, another favourite sort of thing of mine is if you are an endurance athlete, I work with a 1500 meter runner as well now. The sarcomeres and series piece, you're getting contractile speed without compromising fiber type if you're an endurance athlete. So you want to have oxidative muscle and you want to have high speed muscle. It's Superman, isn't it? Like you can do, sevens, rugby player, whatever. They've got an endurance element. They're going to be fit, fast, strong, whatever. I think that's kind of a cool concept that if you can add sarcomeres and series and have training to that end, you can be fast and oxidative. It's like, well, that's the golden goose, isn't it? In those sports, not so much for you and I in the sprint, power, jump realm, but there's something to be said there for a more diverse sport that has endurance elements that are a key part of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I even was having a conversation with a athlete recently who was saying that, one of the ways they're trying to break their 800-meter personal best is actually to break 10 meters per second, and knowing that
Totally.
that's the
Totally.
limiter.
It is 100%. And so, all these speed is a correlate with most things, isn't it? So, and to that end, that might be a really good modality to train with. Some isometric stuff, at long muscle length. Cool. Add sarcomeres and series, and you have to be agonist and antagonist so you can reflexively bounce out of these positions. And I think there's a lot to be investigated there.
Would you use them from a rehab perspective as well? Is that something that, is a tool in your toolbox essentially?
Yeah. I think there's a rehab space that is because you have to learn sometimes to refire muscles, and when you do those things to fatigue, you try and find alternate strategies when the prime movers or the ones you've moved to start crapping out. All of a sudden I need hemagglutide, need to whatever it is. Like so I like them in that space. They're not fun. People hate them, but they're a really good tool.
Yeah, as someone who has tore their ACL in the last nearly 12 months now. I've been living by wall squats, but I definitely agree with you in that, like, it exposes that, that quad to really have to work hard. Because
awesome.
it's died through the surgery and whatnot,
And that stuff happens so quickly too, doesn't it? I had I had this as a little thing a couple of years ago. I worked at the AIS in Canberra for a couple of years, and I had this thing. I had a girlfriend at the time had done her ACL, and her quad just, the quad just goes shrinks almost within 3 or 4 days. And we started playing with the electrical stimulation on the quad, and I had this sort of epiphany that the dendrites that sort of go out and activate muscle, they must all be sucked back in as well, because the current that I needed to innovate that quad was like 4 times what I needed on the other to get almost an MVC on the other quad. And so that you get all this wiring changing as well as the muscular change, the hypertrophy changes. And so these things, it's dramatic. And then I subsequently tried this. Anybody that I found with it at the AIS that had a major leg injury had the same pattern. It's like within days of the injury occurring. So I was like hanging around the physio clinic, grabbing people and putting the electrical stim on, and it was quite interesting. But certainly it's not just muscular. The nervous system gets, and the peripheral nervous system is rapidly affected within days. So
I found that, and I actually did use the electrical stimulation as well, and I found it even useful for grade 1 tears, where I needed to put the kind of, I don't know, I would say the icing on the cake, or you just need to kind of get that last squeeze out of it so that it's working appropriately again, alongside the rehab, of course.
Yeah, totally.
Last thing, Angus, is there anything, I suppose, in your kind of coaching practice, or just what you're seeing out in the coaching world at the minute as interesting? I myself have been thinking a lot about, like, just trust, communication, buy-in, and all that. Like, what's kind of currently, I suppose, occupying your mind? Because I feel like as coaches, we kind of go through a little bit of a season with these things, if you know what I mean. Like,
totally. We're all fashion victims, aren't we, of the different modalities or ideas, or Yeah, and I think the communication piece, as a lot of people start, and I was certainly one of these people that I had a physiology background, and everything was physiology and muscle and this, that, and the other. And then as you sort of progress, you kind of see that somebody's had a bad day, their grandmother's died, or their girlfriend's dumped them, or whatever it is. That stuff, I've still got that stuff's the same, but all the brain is not working the same, and so the communication, the whole the idea of visualizing things, embodying a degree of ethicism, having and all those things come with posture and all these other things that sort of intertwined. I guess I've been reading a couple of random books in that space of late that just trying to and I don't know, I have got a firm position on it yet, but certainly the relationship piece, the old cliche of nobody cares how much they know until they know how much you care, is kind of a real thing, isn't it? And so you can have the best program in the world, but you don't get buy-in, well, it doesn't mean anything. And so I guess as I've got older and matured a bit and become less of a hot-headed idiot, that space has become more important to me, and probably more more of a piece of cause and effect in terms of performance. And I'm still a hot-headed idiot, but these things are, it's a work in progress,
Yeah, I think the relational piece might be a little underspoken about. And I think there's good reason for that, because I think obviously coaches don't want to necessarily reveal behind the hood how they're managing with the athletes, because it can be quite chaotic, you know what I mean? Like
Oh yeah.
giving personal scenarios of how you dealt with X situation where an athlete wasn't listening to you, or like it's not an easy, straightforward thing to explain. And it also comes with a degree of you know, you have to be careful, and so you don't want to be touting that on a podcast. But I do think it's
Yeah.
it's really really important, because it's acting like the glue, is what I would almost say to myself. It's like, you have this idea of like, I've got this technical model, I've got these cues, and here's how we're going to get there. But the athlete that you have, maybe they're new, maybe they've been with certain coaches before, like how that actually binds together.
Yeah.
It's
No,
quite
100%.
chaotic, if you know what I mean.
And like the thing is, the population you're working with, track and field athletes are, it's a different population, isn't it? They're not normal people, and so you have you have these people that they often, they understand numbers, they understand these, this the nuance of these different things, and there's a good degree of obsession, and there's a whole spectrum of highly motivated to extremely obsessively damagedly motivated, in terms of the and managing each of these people need to be damaged, brought back to a certain optimal range, and that whole nuance and that stuff is, that's we're forever trying to learn that, aren't we? By experience and cause and effect, and that's a ongoing challenge for everybody, I'm sure.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I think it's something that if you're not intentional about, almost every interaction you have when you're at training, you're kind of maybe letting opportunity slip, I would say, maybe, is a way to look
Yeah,
about it.
totally. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I know you're not necessarily a social media man. I found that out through through reaching out to you initially.
yeah.
But as we've talked about here in this discussion, you do have research online. You've got places where you've published your work and whatnot, and I'd just give you the chance now to share anything that you'd like to point towards the audience.
Nothing really. I'm actually having Mike Schofield and I are sort of in the process of putting together some educational stuff. So at some point we will have something coming out in terms of trying to bring some of the science to life, and I guess it's kind of an interesting era, isn't it? Most of the stuff you can get into AI, and AI will give you a pretty good shout in terms of how to do things. What it doesn't do, it doesn't have the life experience, the storytelling, and all some of the things which are invaluable, I suppose, in a human context. And so, I hope, I don't know if you know Mike. Have you had Mike on before?
I
I'm not
haven't,
sure if you
no,
had
but
Mike.
I've heard of him. Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, very smart, capable young coach. He's coached Olympic medalists and shot put and Mediwishi and a number of other good athletes that he's taken through. He's very very capable guy with PhD and sort of throws biomechanics and periodization. So we've sort of been talking about that. So yeah, I won't say anything more than that, but it will be coming out at some point. And if people want to chase up, I'm sure they'll be able to find it in due course. As you said, I'm pretty average on the old social media and probably arguably a bit intentionally so, because if people want to find you, they'll find you. If it's not that hard to put my name in Google and find my email address, I'm sure. And if they don't, we'll have you. If they can't be asked, well, I can't be asked dealing with them. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Like so, yeah.
I love the New Zealand mannerisms. Very similar to Ireland, definitely blunt. But yeah, no, totally true. I think you have a lot of work out there, and you've definitely done your fair share of podcasts as well, which I've enjoyed and many others have as well. And I do appreciate you taking the time out today to chat to me, Angus. It's been really fun. I've enjoyed it a lot.
Oh no, my pleasure. It's been good. Enjoyed it.